politician or figure won that prize, or is this really a first now?
You probably mean Eastern European, and in fact, last year's award, or who won that award, from Belarus. So, in fact, that's also something that might be interesting there. So it's not only members from the European Union or the European community, it's really about European values. And in this particular case, the reason why Mr. Zelenskyy is being awarded this prize representing the Ukrainian people is because those who actually awarded the prize believed that he was not only supporting or only defending Ukrainian sovereignty, but he's also defending European values. And by the way, that's something that we also heard earlier today during the press conference between Mr. Zelenskyy and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. It was clear that it was not only about Ukraine, it was not only about what was happening in Ukraine, it's also about understanding that this war is a challenge for Europe, and as such is a challenge that Europe also has to fight hand in hand with Ukraine. That was very, very clear today during that press conference.
And it's quite amazing now that people like the German Chancellor or the body that will award the Charlemagne Prize are actually referring to that of Ukraine, if you like, being the last bulwark between Russia's aggression and Europe, which is exactly what Volodymyr Zelenskyy said the last time he was in Germany, last year, shortly before the invasion began at the Munich Security Conference. Does this award have any meaning for Zelenskyy other than nice to have?
It is important. It does have a meaning to him. It actually strengthens the idea that he is not fighting this alone, that he can count on European support when it comes to fighting against what he has described as the aggressor. So the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine. He has actually asked for help on various occasions, not only economic help or political support, but also military support. Again, he referred to that today when he met German leaders, and it's important to stress that that support was actually today very evident, because it comes just as German leaders announced that they are helping Ukraine, or they're giving Ukraine another very big package of military aid worth 2.7 billion euros. It's being described as the biggest package yet to come from Germany. So for Ukraine, and in particular for the President Zelenskyy, it essentially means that he can count on that support from Europe. It hasn't always been easy, Monica.
I was just about to say, because he's actually been accompanied to Aachen in order to receive this prize by the German Chancellor. They were not always as close as we can witness them to be today.
Absolutely the case. In fact, the past year we have seen many controversies, we have seen many difficulties in the bilateral relationship, in particular for what Ukrainian leaders, and in particular Mr. Zelenskyy, believed was Germany's reluctance when it came to sending weapons. Also, and this is another important issue, there was a lot of criticism coming from Ukraine, but not only from Ukraine, also from some of Germany's most important allies, for what they had considered to be Germany's closeness to Russia before the war began. You may know that Germany had a very important but very difficult relationship as well with Russia. There was a dependence from Germany on Russian energy, and since the war began, Germany has tried to reduce that dependence, actually successfully reduced that dependence on Russian energy, but viewed from Kyiv, viewed from other European capitals, even viewed from Washington, that dependence and that relationship that Germany had in the past to Russia was very problematic indeed. And that's why the relationship between Germany and Ukraine, and in particular between the two governments, had been very difficult. And that's why this visit now in particular is seen as a way to smoothen things out, to make those problems part of the past, to look forward, to really think about the issues where they do see eye to eye. I would still like to stress that it's not in every issue that they still see eye to eye, but that's at least the message that they're trying to send when we see, for example, the images earlier today in Berlin of these military honors for President Zelenskyy. When he sees President Zelenskyy visiting not only the German Chancellor, but also the German President, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who's Germany's head of state. And now, obviously, when we will see President Zelenskyy receiving this very important award, the Charlemagne Prize. So it's all about this show of solidarity and unity, even understanding that in the past there have been very difficult moments between Germany and Ukraine.
Of course, and because you mentioned the Charlemagne Prize, obviously that award ceremony we're going to follow for you as soon as it starts. And we have some very high-level speakers there also. There'll be Olaf Scholz, there will be the President of the European Commission, there'll be the Polish Prime Minister, who also hasn't always seen eye to eye with German politicians, with Olaf Scholz. So that also very interesting that he's actually actively participating in this ceremony. And of course, Volodymyr Zelenskyy will speak himself after he receives the award. When you mention about those frictions that there were at the start of this war and how it's changed, for one, it has to do, obviously, with German economic interests and the high dependency on Russia, especially in terms of energy, but also within Germany, some public resistance towards somehow being part of anything to do with the military, which has to do with German history. Has that been overcome now, or is this actually growing?
It's in the process of being overcome, that reluctance. I would actually say Germany in the past was really reluctant. There were policies in place that prevented Germany from sending weapons to conflict areas, for example. Again, as you correctly mentioned, that had to do with Germany's history. Germany saw its current obligations, if you will, or its current role more from the diplomatic front. But when the war in Ukraine began, Germany understood slowly, but it did understand that it had to change, that it had to shift. The word here in Germany to understand, that is Zeitenwende, which is part of a speech that Chancellor Scholz gave only a few days after the war in Ukraine began. It means a change of political era, and it essentially means a change in German foreign and security policy. And that change actually means that Germany began to understand that it also had to help Ukraine not only with words or with diplomacy or with money, but that it also had to do it with weapons. And the process has been a difficult one. It wasn't always the case that Germany immediately said, OK, we'll send weapons, and then those weapons were sent. It was accompanied by a very difficult and sometimes long political debate. Germany is a giant that moves slowly. And you can clearly see that here because it's something that is always accompanied by a big political debate. German leaders, and in particular the German Chancellor, was very clear that if he was going to make these big changes, he had to have the German public on board. And the German public was not always on board, was not always very happy seeing that Germany was changing stance all of a sudden when it came to some very important elements that had been key in Germany for decades. So that's why Germany has moved slowly. For Ukraine and for some of Germany's allies, too slowly in certain occasions. And that's where the criticism comes from. But if you view it internally, if you view it from someone like who's here in Germany, it's part of that political debate that Germany has been going through step by step, and it has understood. And I do think today we're seeing a clear example of why that is understood, that it had to make that change. It doesn't mean that that change will not have any problems in the next few weeks or in the next few months. One very difficult issue, which was also mentioned during the press conference, was the issue of fighter jets, which Germany sees very critically.
Very thin line between weapons for defence and the weapons that could be used for attack, and of course fighter jets all of a sudden bringing NATO even closer to the conflict.
Exactly. The question in that case would be, when does a country, or when does an alliance, in this case NATO, become part of a war, party to a war? And that's something that obviously, from a legal standpoint, NATO wants to avoid. They're keen to help Ukraine defend itself. They see Russia as the aggressor, and they understand that they need to help Ukraine to defend itself. But as you say, there's a very thin line between providing that for Ukraine so that Ukraine can defend itself, and then being party to a war, which is something that obviously Europe wants to avoid. Russia, on the other hand, believes that Europe is already party to the war and that NATO played actually a role in creating this war in the first place, but that's not the way that this is viewed here in Europe.
It's a fascinating debate, and Thomas, we will continue discussing it, obviously also keeping an eye on the live images that we're waiting for in order to share with you that awards ceremony when the Ukrainian president will receive the very prestigious International Charlemagne Prize in Aachen. What a transition, Thomas Sparrow, of Ukraine president. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year, President Zelensky's leadership has certainly been put to the test. He has emerged largely as a symbol of strength and resistance. So here's a closer look at how this unlikely leader has navigated Europe's first war in decades.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a wartime leader who never expected to be one. But Russia's 2022 invasion shattered Europe's post-Cold War order. Marking the anniversary of Nazi Germany's World War II defeat, Zelenskyy vowed Ukraine would prevail in today's struggle against aggression from a different neighbor.
We fought then, and we fight now, so that no one ever again enslaves other nations or destroys other countries. And all those old evils that modern Russia is bringing back will be defeated, just as Nazi Germany was defeated.
Zelenskyy rose to fame as a comedian, starring as a fictional president in the popular TV show Servant of the People. It became the name of his real-life political campaign, with a focus on tackling corruption. Zelenskyy was 41 years old when Ukrainians elected him president in 2019. As Russia amassed forces along its border with Ukraine, Zelenskyy downplayed talk of a possible invasion. But when Russian troops crossed the border and began advancing on Kyiv, Zelenskyy remained in the capital in a show of courage. His nightly video messages helped keep up morale and inspired worldwide admiration as Ukraine pushed back against the Russian invaders. Zelenskyy has also visited troops close to the front line, including near the embattled eastern city of Bakhmut. Zelenskyy's communication and public image, in contrast to the authoritarian style surrounding Russia's President Vladimir Putin, have helped Ukraine earn Western sympathies and pledges of continued support. Zelenskyy has been especially keen to press for membership in the European Union. On a visit to Brussels ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion, he said there wouldn't be peace in Europe until Ukraine was a part of the EU.
We are protecting Europe from a regime that has proven that it only has one desire: to destroy the freedom of Europe, to be an authoritarian master on the continent.
It is for this commitment to defending Europe and its values that Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been chosen for this year's Charlemagne Prize, the EU's top award for contributions to European unity.
And that's exactly what we are covering now, namely the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen 2023, the city of Aachen in Western Germany, where the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy will be awarded this prestigious prize with also some European-grade dignitaries. Thomas Barry, DW's political correspondent, is here with me in the studio to also give us a little bit of context. And we should be seeing live images any moment of the stage in Aachen. Do we know exactly where they are?
Well, it's in the city of Aachen in Western Germany, where the traditional prize is normally given. And it's important to also stress that until the very last minute, it was unclear whether Mr. Zelenskyy would be attending the prize. Yes, for security reasons, absolutely, or whether he would be delivering a video message. You can imagine that the security protocol in Aachen was incredibly tight. We knew in advance that leaders in Aachen, political leaders, but also security leaders in Aachen, were preparing for both scenarios. So for an official in-person visit by Mr. Zelenskyy, but also for the possibility that he would be delivering a video message. In any case, for Aachen, this is particularly important. It's also, by the way, very significant for Mr. Zelenskyy himself. We've been talking about European unity. And when it comes to European unity, when it comes to European solidarity, Mr. Zelenskyy views himself as part of the European project. That's, by the way, something that we've also seen in various press conferences, in various appearances. And I think that's why for him in this particular case, it's also about showing that Ukraine also belongs in a way to the European family. However, it's also important to stress that this does not mean that Ukraine will be a member of the European Union very soon. That's always a very long process. It takes some time. There are many reforms that have to be carried out by the country that wants to enter the European Union. So there will be probably a signal that Ukraine belongs to the European family, but that does not translate immediately into the fact that Ukraine will be part of the European Union. So I would certainly say that for Aachen, the city hosting this prize for Mr. Zelenskyy, but also for Germany, an important moment, and as you stressed, Monica, an important moment that will be witnessed, by the way, not only by Mr. Zelenskyy and German Chancellor Scholz, but we're also going to hear Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. We have Mateusz Morawiecki from Poland, the Polish leader, and we have obviously Zelenskyy, who is expected to give a speech later in the proceedings.
And if I research this correctly, we will have, obviously, because this is a festive occasion, we will hear music and poetry, and all by Ukrainian artists, both alive and already dead. That is also, I mean, that's not just a nice touch when you look at some of the titles of those pieces of music that we're going to hear, and poems like that prayer for the Ukraine. That's a real sort of also emotional support that is shown here for Ukraine, because the award, the Charlemagne Prize, is not just bestowed to the President of Ukraine, but also, as it says in the title of the occasion, to the people of Ukraine.
Yes, it is indeed the President of Ukraine receiving this award on behalf of the Ukrainian people, and it was given to the Ukrainian people and to Mr. Zelenskyy because of their fight, for their own sovereignty, but also, as it was stressed by those who awarded the prize, because it essentially means a fight for European values. And we can now see those live pictures, or the pictures at least, from the city of Aachen.
But they are, I think, file pictures to show us previous occasions at the city. So we're still waiting for the live event, today's event, to begin. Obviously, we will see the dignitaries, and we will see Zelenskyy and everybody who is expected, Olaf Scholz. We will see them hopefully enter this big festive hall in order to start this occasion, this festive occasion. That the people of Ukraine, because we talked earlier about the fact that this prestigious prize is awarded to big figures, heads of state, politicians, but also maybe ordinary people who did something very special for European unity. That is the thought that it was also founded in 1949, obviously after the horrendous Second World War, in the aftermath, for European unity. But have ever people of a country also been awarded, or is that a novelty?
The idea is really about European unity. It's about showing people, institutions, leaders that have really made a difference when it comes to European unity. In some cases, it is absolutely evident what kind of role these people or these institutions played in terms of European unity. In other cases, it's not that evident, but it's obviously always clearly explained by the organization that awards the Charlemagne Prize. In this particular case, the reason why Mr. Zelenskyy, and in particular the Ukrainian people, were awarded the Charlemagne Prize, we'll hear more about that once the ceremony starts, is because of their fight for the sovereignty of their country. But as I already stressed a few minutes ago, it's also about making sure that it's not only about Ukraine. It's not only something that refers to what's happening on Ukrainian soil, that the fight is something that goes much further than that. It's about European values. We're talking here about Ukraine, a country that was invaded, a country whose territorial integrity suffered because of that invasion coming from Russia. And it was clear today, for example, in the German Chancellery, where Mr. Zelenskyy met Chancellor Scholz, that fight for territorial integrity is something that has to go beyond Ukraine. That's something that is important for all countries and for all continents, that no country can simply invade another country and change borders using force, that there's something that has to be really, really clear, that there can be no exceptions to that. And it's this idea.
So it also sends a strong signal to Moscow, ultimately.
Absolutely.
What we're seeing now.
I was just about to say that it sends a clear signal to Moscow that what Moscow did, invade Ukraine, change borders, is actually something that's unacceptable in today's world. And that's the message, ultimately, that's being sent from Aachen now, but also previously from Berlin. And by the way, it's not only about Berlin and Aachen. Mr. Zelenskyy has been on a sort of European tour, if you will. He was in Italy only yesterday. He visited the Netherlands, he visited Finland, he's visited other European capitals as well in the past. I think his goal there is to really strengthen that support coming from European capitals to his cause. It's also about making sure that people in those capitals, in those countries, continue being interested in what's happening in Ukraine, because the longer the war goes, the higher the risk maybe that people stop being interested, or that that interest in some ways reduces itself.
Or that the cost for actually giving support is becoming too high.
Is becoming higher?
People, yeah, they have to pay higher energy prices, for example, in Germany, which is a direct consequence.
Absolutely.
And so across Europe and the Western world, you can feel to a lower or a larger extent the impact that this support has on the domestic economies and the domestic life. So it really is about keeping people
interested and get that support. Obviously, we can't compare the impact that the war has had in Ukraine, where millions of people have been affected, where millions of people have suffered directly, with the impact that you can see in other European capitals. I think it's difficult to compare that. But you can say that indirectly, obviously, European capitals have been affected, European countries have been affected by the war in Ukraine. For example, when it comes to the issue of higher energy costs, I mean, we see clearly here in Germany. And there is a risk, I would agree with you, that as the war continues, that maybe people see that the cost is too high for them to continue supporting Ukraine. And that's why probably one of the reasons why Mr. Zelenskyy is going to these different capitals is to say that support needs to continue, because it's not only about Ukraine, it's also about European values that are at stake. Something that, by the way, we've also heard from other European leaders, and we've also heard, by the way, from Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
And the interesting thing is also that, of course, the longer the war continues, the wish for peace is equally growing, but not at any cost. And I found it very interesting that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also confirmed that and underlined that peace negotiations have to be on Ukraine's terms. And not some meddling just for the sake of peace.
Fair and just peace. That's how Volodymyr Zelenskyy described it in today's press conference with Chancellor Scholz, basically saying that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine have to be respected. It's not peace dictated by Russia. It's not peace at all costs, but Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty have to be respected. Obviously, European leaders are thinking about how peace could be achieved, how peace can be prepared, what kind of plan has to be in place. There's been discussion about a 10-point peace plan. But first, obviously, fighting has to stop. First, obviously, there has to be some respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity and for Ukraine's sovereignty. And that's something that European leaders have clearly stated on various occasions. So there is an understanding about the need for peace. In fact, Zelenskyy himself said they would like to win the war by the end of this year. The question is how that peace can actually be achieved. And that's a very big question. If you ask Germans, there have been polls on this. Many would actually like Germany to have a bigger role when it comes to diplomatic efforts to end the war in Ukraine. But that, again, is a challenge, because Germany doesn't want to, by the way, European leaders don't want to have diplomatic discussions when the war is still ongoing again, because the idea is that the peace cannot be dictated by Russia, that it has to be fair and just, and that it has to, above all, mean the respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity.
And just a quick reminder for the viewers who may just have joined us and are wondering what they're seeing and hearing. We're currently seeing live pictures from the West German city of Aachen, where shortly the award ceremony will take place, where Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the president of the Ukraine, will receive the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen, and he'll be accompanied by the German Chancellor. We will also hear a speech by the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The Polish Prime Minister will be here. Also, by the way, in the studio with me still, Thomas Sparrow. Why is the Polish Prime Minister there as well?
Well, I think the Polish Prime Minister plays an important role when it comes to understand different visions that may come from Europe. On the one hand, Poland has played a significant role in supporting Ukraine. Poland has played, by the way, a significant role in supporting Ukrainian refugees that have had to leave the country since the beginning of the war, something that, by the way, Germany has also done. If you just look at Germany, over 1 million people from Ukraine have arrived in this country since the war in Ukraine began. So the idea is bringing together different personalities that can really reflect this idea of European unity coming from different angles, from different perspectives. You have the German Chancellor, you have the President of the European Commission, so the Brussels perspective, and you have the leader of Poland presenting that idea of Central Eastern Europe as well. So I think that's an interesting choice for the list here in the Charlemagne Prize, but I think it's also an important one, recognizing that Poland has played really an important role when it comes to supporting Ukraine. It has put a lot of pressure, by the way, on Germany for Germany to increase its help. It's not always been easy from the German perspective to hear those words from Poland, but from a Ukrainian perspective, it has been very important because Germany has faced pressure when it comes to delivering weapons, to delivering other kind of support towards Ukraine. It has maybe taken longer than what Ukraine would like, but it has come. And it has come in part because of pressure coming not only from Kiev, but also from other capitals. And when you think about the capitals where that pressure has been coming, you have to include Warsaw, you have to include other places like Washington as well. Leaders from those countries saying that Germany should play a more important role when it comes to helping Ukraine. And you see that, by the way, with concrete actions that have come only in the last few hours. Yesterday, Germany announced a very big military package for Ukraine, 2.7 billion euros, described as the biggest package yet that Ukraine is receiving in military terms. A clear symbol, a clear signal of Germany's support. I think that explains why we have these different personalities today meeting in Aachen for the ceremony where the Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelenskyy, will be receiving the Charlemagne Prize for European Unity on behalf of the Ukrainian people.
And we'll, of course, be watching that and we'll be sharing that with you as soon as this ceremony begins. Because you just mentioned those 2.7 billion euros in military support during the press conference in Berlin today. That even led the president, the Ukrainian president, to quip, you know, basically, I just have to come back a few more times and we'll be sort of set. And it even made the German Chancellor laugh in that moment, which is a sight we don't see very often. This support also is one of the reasons, obviously, why the Ukrainian president is traveling, not just to Germany. Yesterday, he was in Italy, indeed. The last stop before Berlin was in Italy, and there Zelenskyy was in Rome. He went to the Vatican. It was the very first time since the war broke out that he was there. And while in the Italian capital, he received assurance of aid and support from politicians as well as the Pope.
Dozens of Ukrainians living in Italy waited for hours in the rain, chanting and waving flags, hoping to catch a glimpse of their president on his first trip to Rome since Russia's invasion more than a year ago.
Of course, today we gathered here in the rain to express a lot of gratitude to our president. We all support him, love him and wish him peace.
We, as the Ukrainian community in Italy, are with our people. We are with our president and we wish him the best. And in this time of war, he is doing a good job. He is the president of all of us.
The crowd cheered as the motorcade went by on its way to Chigi Palace, the seat of Italian government. There, President Zelenskyy met with Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. The two gave each other a warm embrace before heading inside for a closed-door meeting which lasted more than an hour. At a joint press conference after the talks, Meloni reaffirmed Italy's staunch support for Ukraine's war effort with military and other aid.
Peace will arrive only if Russia stops hostilities and the attacks on civilians. We want to reiterate our appeal to Moscow to stop the aggression and withdraw its troops from Ukrainian territory. We are in favor of a diplomatic solution of the conflict.
Meloni expressed support for President Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, which calls for the withdrawal of Russian troops, the restoration of Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, and the establishment of a special tribunal to prosecute Russian war crimes. Zelensky thanked Italy for its support. Then it was on to the Vatican, where the Ukrainian president had a private audience with Pope Francis.
Great honor.
He presented the pontiff with a bulletproof vest that had been painted with an image of the Madonna. Following their meeting, which lasted some 40 minutes, Zelensky sent a tweet saying he asked the Pope to also publicly back his peace plan.
So the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, they're not mincing words. Yesterday, also telling the Pope to be publicly backing the Ukraine, i.e. taking a public stance also against Russia, something that the Vatican was struggling with as well.
Yes, and that's why all this visit is particularly significant as a broader visit that we have to understand. It's not only about him visiting the Vatican or visiting Rome or visiting Berlin. It's really about, and that's how I see it, a broader international appeal that Mr. Zelenskyy is taking to different European capitals to say, please continue to support us. First and foremost with weapons, with ammunition. That's his short-term goal. There's been a lot of talk about a possible offensive, counter-offensive, and for that he needs that support coming from the West. But I would also say that he's here on a mission which is a bit more long-term, and that's political support for Ukraine's European perspective. He has mentioned that on various occasions, that he believes Ukraine is part of the European community, that he would like to see Ukraine as a member of NATO, so the transatlantic military alliance, that he would like to see Ukraine as a member of the European Union. He would like to see more support coming from European capitals towards that perspective. And the key word here, Monica, is perspective, because there is a perspective. The key question is how long that perspective will last until it turns into reality, and that can be a long process. We've seen that with others. Absolutely. Yeah, we've seen that from other countries, that it takes a long time before they really make all the necessary reforms to become members of the European Union. There is a possibility of fast-tracking certain elements, but then there's the issue of proportionality. You don't want to give Ukraine the possibility to really fast-track and enter the European Union, while other countries have been waiting for many, many years to do the same. So there are certain rules that have to be fulfilled before a country can join the bloc. So the key word again is perspective. It's showing that both from the Ukrainian side and from the EU side, there's at least the idea that Ukraine will belong to the European family. And the fact, by the way, that he's receiving this Charlemagne Prize, which is a prize specifically on European unity, is an indication that these European leaders attending and other European leaders do see Ukraine as part of the broader European community. They do see Ukraine as playing a role when it comes to European unity, when it comes to European values, when it comes to European priorities. And that's something that explains why, for Mr. Zelenskyy, this visit to Germany today, and in particular this visit to the western German city of Aachen, is so relevant.
This afternoon, and we expect him together with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz any moment this afternoon. We've already seen some live pictures from Aachen, from the hall, the festive hall, where the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen 2023 will be awarded to Volodymyr Zelenskyy and, of course, to the people of Ukraine. And this is the live coverage. We're basically just waiting for them to arrive. And here with me in the studio is Thomas Sparrow, who can fill us in on all the background. And if you mentioned, obviously, the Ukrainian push now really to become also a member of the European Union, and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was in Kiev several times, also basically signaling, yes, we've heard you and you should be part of the European family. As well as the push of being a member of NATO, that is not just about economics or emotions. It also has to do with security, because a war of aggression like the one that's taking place now is very unlikely if it's a country that's part of the European Union or NATO.
Absolutely, because NATO has rules, very clear rules, that if one country is attacked, it's an attack on all countries, and all countries would have to to react. So NATO does offer security guarantees that are much more important if you are a member of NATO than if you're not a member of NATO. Clear example, Finland, NATO's newest member. One of the reasons why Finland wanted to become part of NATO is precisely because of these security guarantees. But I would like just to shift 1 second to maybe explain to our viewers that are just joining why this prize in Aachen is so relevant. What's the context behind this? Because we're talking here about Aachen in Western Germany. That was one of the first major cities in West Germany to be liberated by the Allied forces. And it was after the Second World War that a group of citizens in Aachen decided to join forces and call for European unity. And that's how this prize was actually launched, was born. And it's been going on with a few interruptions since 1950. And there's a long and very important list of people and institutions that have received this prize. Very important for Europe. So from Jean Monnet to Konrad Adenauer, Helmut Kohl, I could give you a very long list of names. So that's why this prize is seen as very symbolic and also very important when it comes to European unity. And the fact that we have now the Ukrainian president representing the Ukrainian people, receiving specifically this award in a city like Aachen, which was the first major city in West Germany to be liberated by Allied forces, is significant from a European perspective. It is an important moment, and I think...
And this moment is coming closer, if I interpret those live images correctly.
Closer and closer.
We've already seen the German Minister of Culture, we've seen the leader of the German opposition, Friedrich Merz, enter, as well as the former Chancellor candidate Armin Laschet there, the current head of North Rhine-Westphalia, Hendrik Wüst. So all those German political VIPs have entered the hall. There is again Friedrich Merz, the leader of the opposition, the CDU-CSU party, the Conservatives. So things seem to be starting very soon. So perhaps just briefly, while keeping an eye on the occasion there, Zelenskyy is also perceived as a kind of pop star in those last year, because he's given all these video speeches, not just on a political scale, but also when it comes to big cultural occasions, where he sends his video messages, always reminding people of what's happening in Ukraine and why it is so important not to forget to support Ukraine, regardless whether you're a politician or an artist. And he's also been referred to as a diplomat, a motivator, and in the situation so warrants as a highly articulate critic. Is that the kind of combination that warrants the reception of that prestigious prize?
That's the kind of combination that he has needed to precisely get all the help that he has received in the past year from Western countries. He needs to be that kind of leader. He needs to make that kind of difference in order to make sure that that support is given to Ukraine. And we're talking about military support, which we've discussed for a long time now, but we're talking about political support as well. We're talking about economic support coming from different countries. And that's the type of leadership that has helped him precisely to get that support in recent months. He has to be a very clear leader. He has to have also a unique style, which we also see the fact that he doesn't wear a suit and a tie, that he comes with his typical pullover, that he speaks in the way that he does, that he's eloquent, that he's critical, that he's direct. These kinds of elements have been important for him to really get that support. It's not always been easy. It has been controversial. It has created some problems in some of the countries that have been the recipients of that criticism, because it's not always nice and easy to receive criticism from other countries. But if you look at it simply from the aid that he has received, it has been successful. And again, that's the way he has chosen to really make sure that he and his government can get the political, military and economic support that they need to be able to carry out and to fight this war against Russia.
And Thomas, you also told us, obviously, about the origins of this prize and all those recipients over the decades, those big names. Has this prize, the Charlemagne Prize of Aachen, ever made a difference to the recipient, other than, I said it earlier, nice to have?
I wouldn't say it's just a prize that it's nice to have. The fact that it's so important, the fact that it's been awarded with a few interruptions since 1950, the fact that Mr. Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people now join this very important list of people, the fact that we're talking here about European unity, the fact that this is a prize that's being awarded by a high number of very important politicians means that it has weight, it carries weight, and it helps to bring a message across. And that message that it helps to bring across now is that the fight that Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people are carrying in their war against Russia is one that also has to do with European values. European values like sovereignty, like the respect for that sovereignty, like respect for territorial integrity, like the fact that a country cannot simply invade another, that the fact that one country cannot use force to cross the border and decide to change political structures, that those things cannot happen in the century that we are living, and those are European values that this Charlemagne Prize actually tries to defend. So it's definitely not a prize that is simply nice to have. It does carry political weight, and I think it's political weight that will help Mr. Zelenskyy to bring his message across in different political scenarios.
And this weight is probably also one of the reasons why the Ukrainian president decided, after all, to actually receive the prize in person, because there was speculation that it might be too risky and that he would only send a video message. And when I look at those live images there, this is a big hall, but there are a lot of people, so security certainly is also on people's mind.
Absolutely, and not only in people's mind. I imagine that the security procedures in Aachen were indeed very, very significant. The authorities in Aachen had already indicated in advance that they were preparing for basically any scenario. They were preparing, on the one hand, for Mr. Zelenskyy to receive that award in person, but they were also preparing for him to deliver a video message and not come personally to receive that award. And it was only actually until the very last minute that we found out that he was indeed going to travel with Chancellor Scholz to Aachen from Berlin to receive that award in person. Until the very last minute, it was unclear what kind of procedures would be in place, by the way, also regarding the visit in Berlin. That has to do, obviously, with security issues. Mr. Zelenskyy, when he travels, does not tend to announce his plans much in advance.
Though it was leaked, unfortunately, a little bit too early from the German side, wasn't it?
And it created a lot of problems and a lot of controversy here in Germany. Some of the details were indeed leaked to German press about a week ago. It led to significant problems in the sort of behind-the-scenes planning. And by the way, it also led to an investigation by the police in Berlin for possible treason of secrets, for revealing state secrets.
Serious.
Very serious. The reason is that in some of those reports, some Berlin spokespeople were quoted as having revealed some details, although afterwards the police in Berlin said that they hadn't revealed any details that could have jeopardized the trip. Nevertheless, it did create this investigation, and behind the scenes I can imagine that it also created some problems in the planning of such a high-level visit. Maybe some of the details were actually changed last minute. That's also one of the reasons why only until the very last minute we found out that Mr. Zelenskyy was indeed coming from Rome, that he was indeed meeting the German president and the German chancellor, and that indeed, after meeting the German chancellor, he was traveling with Mr. Scholz to Aachen to receive this prize in person.
Talking of last minute, we see a lot of high-level politicians there and dignitaries in this hall waiting for the ceremony to begin. That is almost like a déjà vu, because earlier today in Berlin, we were also waiting for the press conference between Olaf Scholz and Volodymyr Zelenskyy to start. They obviously had a lot to exchange, maybe something similar now. Is that a good or a bad sign?
Well, it's obviously very difficult to plan these kinds of events in general. There's a lot that goes into planning these kinds of visits, and there's even more going into a visit by the Ukrainian president, a president that is at war with another country. So there is a lot of possibilities for that schedule to move back and forth. There's a lot of space for them to maybe have extra discussions if needed. From the information that we had, it was not only earlier today a meeting between the German Chancellor and the Ukrainian President, but also a meeting that involved other members of the government from both sides. In fact, during the press conference, we could see in the background some of Germany's highest-ranking politicians, from Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock to Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius to German Finance Minister Christian Lindner. You could also see Mr. Kuleba, Ukraine's foreign minister. So there were also discussions beyond just Mr. Scholz and Mr. Zelenskyy. And
yeah, we sometimes, just to explain to our viewers, the live feed, those pictures that we get from Aachen, we share with other broadcasters, and they obviously sometimes decide to show footage that is older. What we've just seen, obviously, was a very, very brief snippet of this TV series that made Volodymyr Zelenskyy famous long before he was a politician, but in which he did play or act a politician, which was also quite astounding when you look at the scope of that career within a very brief period of time. And now he is the man, the politician that most of the world is looking up to for his courage. He refused to escape when he was offered an escape route right after the invasion started. And today he is in Germany, on his way, hopefully in Aachen already, in the western city of Aachen, in order to receive this prestigious prize, the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen for European unity, which, if you take it all together, it's an amazing story.
It is an amazing story. It's also a difficult story, how he ended up being in the spotlight. I can imagine that he would prefer not being in the spotlight if that meant that his country would be at peace. But he does see, obviously, the responsibility that he has at hand, and he does see that role that he needs to play in not only defending his country and his country's values and his country's sovereignty, but also playing a role when it comes to European values and European interests as well. So it's certainly a remarkable story, the rise of President Zelenskyy. And I think that's also something that we may actually hear today in Aachen by these different leaders that will be speaking, not only to commemorate the people of Ukraine for their struggle, for their fight, but also Mr. Zelenskyy as the leader of the country, representing specifically the people of Ukraine. Again, it's about values, it's about interests, it's about policies, but it's also about the person himself. And that's why it has been important for Germany, it has been important for Berlin and also for Aachen that Mr. Zelenskyy made this trip to Germany, the first time he came to Germany since the war in Ukraine began. A significant visit. I think many people were actually hoping he would visit soon because they had seen that Mr. Zelenskyy had been in several other European capitals and they were wondering when he would actually come to Germany. That has to do with the fact that Germany is the second country that has provided the most help to Ukraine after the United States. Something that, by the way, Mr. Zelenskyy himself today mentioned at the German Chancellery, where he met Chancellor Scholz. Germany has played a remarkable role, a controversial role as well. But nevertheless, Germany has been one of the most important countries when it comes to delivering political, economic and military aid to Ukraine. And that's also on top of the fact that over 1 million people from Ukraine have come to Germany since the war in Ukraine began. So you can clearly see that the help is not only coming from the German government, it's also a help that you can see coming from the German people that have welcomed these, over 1 million people that have come from Ukraine since the war began.
Which is also something that President Zelenskyy has referred to today, but also previously, thanking the German people who helped the Ukrainians make a home here, for some temporary home, most of them presumably, as you can imagine, would like to go back into their home country, but also for some to make a proper home here. So there's this sort of what we know as the word welcome culture that really came to life, and that we saw first in 2015, of course, when the then Chancellor Angela Merkel didn't take quite as long, but very swiftly said this very famous sentence, you know, wir schaffen das.
We'll make it.
We'll make it, for which she earned a lot of criticism, was very divisive, but also very memorable. The German Chancellor now, Olaf Scholz, as you told us earlier, took more time to make the decisions, the necessary decisions, to show that Germany supports Ukraine together with its partners. I think that was also and still is something very important for the German Chancellor, that it's not Germany alone, but with its partners, which again also is reflected somehow in this Charlemagne Prize of European unity.
Look, when you look at Germany's key principles, let's say foreign policy principles, you will see that one issue that is frequently repeated by German leaders, it was repeated by Angela Merkel, it was repeated by Chancellor Scholz. It doesn't always happen, but at least they repeat it frequently, is this idea that they don't want to go it alone, that they would like to work hand in hand with other countries, especially when it comes to some of the most important political decisions. Again, there have been exceptions, that have created significant problems for Germany, also during the migration crisis in 2015 and 2016. But in general, it's one of those principles that German leaders repeat. And it's one principle that we have seen very clearly when it comes to Ukraine receiving certain heavy weapons. It is something that the German Chancellor stressed, that they would be interested in doing it, but as long as, for example, the United States also plays its role, or as long as other European countries also play their part. So Germany does not want to be seen as a country leading any kind of military help towards Ukraine as being the country leading. It wants to be seen as a country leading within a European, within a transatlantic framework. And that has to do, again, with Germany's history. It has to do with the way Germany conducts its foreign policy. It has to do with how German people view these issues. Not everyone in Germany sees the issue of weapons deliveries as being something that is actually helpful, for example, to finding stable peace in Ukraine. If you look at the polls, more Germans do tend to support those deliveries now, but it doesn't mean that it's an overwhelming majority. And in fact, you do have around a third of Germans who view this rather critically. And you do have many Germans who would like Germany to really have a greater focus on diplomacy, on diplomatic efforts, rather than just on the military deliveries to Ukraine. So you do have a German society which, maybe just as the German government, is also trying to find what position it has to take in this new world, in the world that changed after Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah. This is also why the German Chancellor today, and certainly the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, keeps reminding the public, be it in Germany or in other countries, of the fact that there is a war going on in my country, if it's Zelenskyy, in Ukraine. We're under attack. And as we speak, Thomas, perhaps before we, and don't worry, we do keep an eye on the city of Aachen in order not to miss the ceremony which we want to bring you live, where President Zelenskyy will receive the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen for European unity. But perhaps this is a good moment to remind ourselves of what's happening in his country as we speak, because in Ukraine, air raid sirens have been heard again as Russia launched strikes on at least 2 locations. The Defense Ministry in Moscow claims it hit sites where Western weapons were being stored, talking about military aid here. Now, they targeted a town in eastern Ukraine, as well as the city of Ternopil in the west of the country, and that's the hometown of Ukraine's Eurovision act Tvorchi. At least 2 people were injured there. In the eastern city of Bakhmut, the Russian Defense Ministry said it repelled attempts by Ukrainian forces to break through its lines. And we talked earlier to DW's Nick Connolly in Kiev, who could tell us more about what's happening there.
Well, certainly things aren't going as planned for Russia in Bakhmut. They've just in the last couple of hours had to admit the deaths in combat of 2 high-ranking officers there. That is something pretty unusual, a sign that they're also having to send their commanders up close to the front lines to try and sort this out and to try and prevent what looks like a very damaging trend for them. American analysts have calculated in the last couple of days Ukraine has returned more than 15 square kilometers of territory in and around Bakhmut. I don't think this is the beginning of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in that part of the country. That wouldn't be very logical, because this is an area that has seen fighting basically since 2014, and where the Russians have lots of defences, lots of trenches. But it certainly is a sign that Ukraine is able to take advantage of these very obvious tensions between the Russian army on the one hand and those Wagner mercenary troops on the other, to really push home the advantage and to take advantage of that weakness, that also lack of logistical capacity. We've heard from the Russians for the first time really in serious kind of terms complaining about a lack of ammunition. That was a problem that the Ukrainians have had much more seriously since this war began. So a real sense there that Russia is on the back foot.
And this is still, it comes even as Russia continued to hit targets across the country overnight, including the west of the country in the city of Ternopil.
Well, exactly. Just as the Eurovision final was happening in Liverpool, you had news coming in of a big fire caused by Russian cruise missiles in the hometown of that Ukrainian act. So, yeah, there is a sense that there is nowhere in this country, however far west, however far it is from the front lines, that is safe from Russian missiles. Yes, Russian missile stocks are running low. Those missile attacks are becoming rarer and less intense. And Ukraine's defences are improving here in Kiev. All the drones that were fired at our direction were shot down, but still some of these missiles, these weapons get through. And when people in this country hear those air raid alarms, however late it is at night, it is worth going down to the cellar to sit this out, because these are threats that are very real. This is not a theoretical danger, and people are still losing their lives day in, day out.
Right, and all of this is happening, of course, as Ukraine's president is here in Berlin trying to bolster the country's defences through diplomacy. How is his trip being perceived where you are?
Well, certainly this is a very conscious attempt to turn the page in relations with Germany. Lots of tensions over the past year. People might remember last spring, Germany's President Steinmeier trying to come to Kiev, and basically that invitation being rescinded last minute. Lots of ruffled feathers there, lots of tensions that took quite some while to deal with. Now a new person in charge of the defense ministry in Berlin, and a sense here in Kiev that Germany is serious about meeting its promises. It's delivered on those Leopard tanks, on the IRIS-T anti-aircraft, anti-missile systems. So a real kind of conscious effort there to show gratitude from the Ukrainian perspective, but also to present a new wish list of things that Ukraine needs. President Zelenskyy said that basically, I'll have enough for this counteroffensive after a few more visits. So no sense that this is the end of what Ukraine wants, but definitely a real change in the tone there, and a sense that the German government is relieved to have some kind of more obviously amicable ties with President Zelenskyy.
Yeah, and when he made that comment, actually, there was some laughter, some giggling, the Chancellor Olaf Scholz, which you don't see that often either. DW's Nick Connolly in Kiev, thank you so much for your reporting. And we're back here at DW's live coverage of the awards ceremony, where the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is about to receive the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen for European unity, the city of Aachen in Western Germany. It's a very prestigious prize, and Thomas Sparrow, DW political correspondent, is here with me in the studio to give all of that a little bit of context, also as we're waiting for certainly the main person of the day, which is Volodymyr Zelenskyy, but also accompanied by the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to arrive here in Aachen. In between, you will see live pictures of some political leaders, dignitaries already in the festive hall, waiting for this ceremony to begin. We have been informed that the German Chancellor flew together with the Ukrainian president from Berlin, where they were meeting this morning, to the city of Aachen for this ceremony. We also expect to hear from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and from the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, who will also deliver a speech. There will be music and poetry composed and written by Ukrainian artists. That also, of course, to underline the significance of this prize, which will be awarded not just to Zelenskyy, but the people of Ukraine, Thomas.
Absolutely, and this is really a big and important list of people that will be talking today about European unity. They will be talking as well about the fight that Ukraine has had in the last year for their sovereignty, but also for what has been described as European values. That's the reason why Mr. Zelenskyy, representing the Ukrainian people, is now receiving this prize for European unity. Ukraine is not a member of the European Union, but its fight for its own sovereignty, its fight for its territorial integrity is seen as a fight also for values that Europe and the European Union deeply care for. And that's the reason why he's being awarded this prize in representation of the people of his country, and why you have also speeches by very important politicians. We're talking here about a speech from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, so the executive branch of the European Union. We're talking here about the Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki. There's obviously also German Chancellor Scholz, who already this morning here in Berlin had a meeting with Mr. Zelenskyy, and we will then obviously see when Mr. Zelenskyy himself receives this award and explains also his perspective on this award. What we can expect from all this is Mr. Zelenskyy to again strengthen that his fight is not a fight only for Ukraine, but it's also something that the West, that Europe, that the United States should deeply care for. He has repeatedly stressed the need for more support coming from the West. That support has focused on military support first and foremost, but it's not only about military support, and I think that's relevant to stress also on this occasion. It is important, obviously, from a military perspective, because Ukraine does say it needs those weapons. It does say it needs those heavy weapons in particular, but it also means political support, and that political support is something that we're going to see very probably today in Aachen.
Exactly. And it is quite amazing also to think about the person that is now the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. It's hardly been said nowadays that he was an actor. This is something that seems to be in another life so far in the past, but it's not that long ago. And he's made such an incredible transition to be this leader now that the rest of the world is looking up to, is willing to support from the United States and the European Union, of course. Some African countries don't quite see it that way, and obviously also some Asian countries are struggling with that. But that's why it's even more important. I think that's also what Olaf Scholz said in his press conference today, that Germany and its partners support Ukraine and in an unwavering way.
And essentially, Monica, that these values that we've been talking to are values that not only apply to Ukraine or to Europe, but that apply to the rest of the world as well, to the rest of democracies in the world. So basically, that's something that also countries in Latin America, in Africa, Asia, Oceania should be looking at very, very carefully. In other words, that this is, again, not something that just affects Ukraine or Europe. But you mentioned an important element, an important view here, because this is the European view. If you go to Africa, if you go to Latin America, you have a very different way of looking at things. I can say that myself because I am Latin American myself, but the view there is a different one when you look at the war in Ukraine, in Latin America, but also in Africa. There's, in many countries, a degree of anti-Western ideas, anti-Americanism. There are also ties with Russia coming from certain countries. In many cases, they view the whole war critically, and they also view the decision to send weapons to Ukraine in a critical way. If you look at how this has played out in the United Nations General Assembly, for example, you see a rather significant list of countries coming from places like Latin America or Africa or Asia that have abstained from openly supporting Ukraine in this war. And that gives you an idea that this fight for values, this fight for sovereignty, this fight for territorial integrity is something that may be clear here in Europe, but in other parts of the world is seen differently. And I think that's always important to keep in mind, because you maybe think that the view in Europe is the view that's shared in other parts of the world, and that's not always the case. It is obviously the case in certain parts of the world, but not everywhere.
And I can just see, Thomas Berry, as you were explaining this, there's some little bit more movement now in Aachen, where the ceremony will take place any moment, which we're going to cover for you live. But I've been saying that over the last hour, that it's going to start any moment. So until it really does, and I can promise that we will not miss it, there is
Well, we're having a nice conversation, Monica.
We're having a very nice conversation. Yeah, I'm not complaining. Oh, there is the President of the European Parliament, Metsola.
Yes,
also...
and Bärbel Bass, who's
Yes.
the President of the German Bundestag as
Right.
well. So this is also an indication that we may be very close to the beginning of this event. Again, you and I have said it many, many times, but probably the fact that you see these two leaders approaching there
Yes.
does mean that very soon we will begin.
But perhaps there will be a good moment so that we don't talk over
You see some of the
actual ceremony.
previous
Martin
people
Schulz, yes.
who received the award, Martin Schulz, also Tsikhanouskaya from Belarus. You see key important politicians there also from Germany coming in. So I do expect any minute now we will see Volodymyr Zelenskyy actually enter the stage.
So let's just briefly outline what's going to happen. So they will enter, we will hear music, we will hear the so-called morning serenade from Ukrainian composer Valentin Silvestrov, who is still alive. He's in his 80s and he actually fled the Ukraine in March last year with just a suitcase. In the suitcase, he had his latest composition. So that also I find quite significant to choose these composers as part of the ceremony.
Absolutely. Afterwards, we will hear initial remarks by Sibylle Keupen, who's the mayor of the city of Aachen. And then we will come to one of the important parts of or the most important parts of the ceremony today, namely the speech by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, followed by further more music. And then we will hear Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. And the list continues, Monica.
Indeed, it continues with the Polish Prime Minister. And then we actually come to the moment that we've been waiting for now, this whole afternoon, namely the awarding of the Charlemagne Prize of Aachen 2023 for European unity to President Zelenskyy. The Lord Mayor of Aachen will participate in that, as well as the chair of the directorate of the Charlemagne Committee, who will hand over the document. The Lord Mayor will hand over the medal. Then we will hear an old hymn, Urbs Aquensis, Urbs Regalis, a Latin hymn from the 12th century, an old hymn from the city of Aachen. And then it is the turn of Volodymyr Zelenskyy to react to this honor. I think one can say to this great honor.
Well, it is an honor, especially if you consider how many people have received this award since it was first given in 1950. If you consider the role that Aachen actually plays in European unity. Aachen was, and I think that's important to remember, was the first major city in West Germany that was liberated by Allied forces, and it was after the war ended, actually only a few years after the war ended, that a group of citizens in Aachen came together and really made an appeal for European unity, and that's how this prize began. It has been awarded since 1950 with a couple of interruptions. But if you look at the list of people, the list of institutions that have received this Charlemagne Award, it's long and it's important. Pope Francis, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, former German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, Jean Monnet, Helmut Kohl, Václav Havel. I could go on until we actually hear someone talking.
No, I mean, but it is this context. And I think when it was announced, which I think it was already in December last year, towards the end of December last year, that the Charlemagne Prize 2023 would be awarded to the Ukrainian president. It's a I mean, Václav Havel from the Czech Republic, you still know is in Europe. And now we hear applause, and I assume this will indicate that someone we've been waiting for is entering, and there indeed he is, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian president, in his now very well-known jumper. You said it earlier, the military jumper.
You also see German Chancellor Scholz and Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, also entering the festive hall. There you see the German Chancellor, who was precisely earlier today with Mr. Zelenskyy in Berlin. So they traveled together from Berlin to Aachen, and Chancellor Scholz will also be giving a speech there. You see Mr. Zelenskyy.
With the Belarusian opposition leader.
Tsikhanouskaya, correct.
Interesting combination.
Who was also awarded the prize. So that gives you also an idea of what kind of values, what kind of ideals, what kind of ideas the Charlemagne Prize tries to show.
Another very, very warm welcome there for the Ukrainian president.
And for the viewers that are joining us just now, we're watching live pictures from Aachen, Western Germany, where President Zelenskyy from Ukraine will receive the very prestigious Charlemagne Prize for the Unity of Europe.
And all of that is part of a very festive program surrounding it with music from Ukrainian composers. The first piece should start now. And that was an introduction, the music by Ukrainian composer Valentin Silvestrov. Before we hear the first speech by the Lord Mayor of Aachen, Sibylle Keupen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to the Coronation Hall of our City Hall, wholeheartedly to the conferral of the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen 2023 to the Ukrainian people and with its President, His Excellency Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Today, in the presence of the Minister of Exterior, the ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, dear Prime Minister Morawiecki, and a warm welcome to the institutions of the European Union, the President of the European Parliament, Mrs. Metsola, and the President of the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen. We are also pleased to welcome the representatives of the constitutional institutions of the German Federation, Mrs. Barth, Chancellor Scholz, and Minister of State Roth, and the President of the Federal Constitutional Court, Professor Dr. Habart. We welcome the Excellencies, the ambassadors of Bulgaria, Croatia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, the United States of America, Latvia, France, Ukraine, and Poland, as well as all members of the Consular Corps. A very warm welcome goes to the state of North Rhine-Westphalia and its State Premier Wüst, State Parliament President Cooper, and the members of the state government and the State Parliament, as well as the former Prime Ministers of our state, Jürgen Rüttgers and Armin Laschet. A very warm welcome also to all members of the German Bundestag and the European Parliament. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome the numerous former Charlemagne Prize laureates among us, Mrs. Dalia Grybauskaite and Martin Schulz, as well as last year's laureates, Mrs. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Veronika Tsepkalo, and Tatiana Komich, who represents her sister Maria Kolesnikova here. A warm welcome goes to the representatives of the churches and faith communities, and especially to the Ukrainian Nobel Peace Prize laureate Alexandra Matviichuk. Welcome to Aachen. I welcome the members of the bodies of our Charlemagne Prize with former Lord Mayor Dr. Jürgen Linden as the chairman of the board for the conferring of the Charlemagne Prize. Since the attack on Ukraine in February 2022, which is in breach of international law, we have been talking in Europe about a turning point in time. The Ukrainian people, who have been fighting for their sovereignty since the end of the Soviet Union, who've always been clearly committed to the liberal and democratic values of the European Union, and who have been striving for membership in the European Union since the 1990s, are being hit hard by the consequences of this turning point. This brutal Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has been going on for over a year now, and many of us have already become accustomed to it, to the daily reports of terror, arms deliveries, to ever new threats from the Russian side. But as much as this news has become part of our everyday life, it remains our task to make sure that the people who are directly affected by this war are not forgotten. It is our duty to constantly remind ourselves that in our Europe, a whole people is being denied a life in peace and freedom. An entire generation is being deprived of its childhood, youth, opportunities and dreams. That is why we should remember, especially today, that there are individual destinies behind each of these horror stories. On the occasion of conferring the Charlemagne Prize to you, Your Excellency Zelenskyy, and to the Ukrainian people, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the situation of some people off the big political stage today. In Ukraine and also here in Aachen, and to give them a face and a voice. They deserve this. Two of these people present today are Anna Kysil and Julia Pich. They represent the Association of Ukrainians in Aachen. Both women, when the war started, immediately recognized the giant tasks lying ahead of us, and together with other committed citizens, they founded the Association Ukrainians in Aachen. Both women have been living in Germany for a long time and in Aachen, and since this war started, they've been in constant fear, worrying about their parents, siblings and friends in Ukraine. Since the war, their lives have changed completely. With great passion, they helped to find accommodation for Ukrainian war refugees, collected and transported humanitarian aid supplies, and called for demonstrations. In the meantime, this has developed into much more. The association organizes language courses, is committed to cultural exchange, and wants to preserve Ukrainian history, culture and tradition as an anchor for the refugees, and at the same time wants to familiarize Aachen citizens with them. Ukrainians in Aachen is today a reliable partner for all actors thanks to the sustained efforts of its founders. The association has contributed to making our city a safe haven for war refugees from the very beginning. And for this, we would like to thank you wholeheartedly. One of them is Julia Hryvniova. With her children and her husband, she was one of the first Ukrainian refugee families to come to Aachen, and I would also like to welcome her especially warmly today. The story of Julia Hryvniova and her family is representative of countless others. Forced to flee their homeland once before due to the annexation of Crimea in 2014, the family was able to build a new home and a new life in Bucha near Kiev, until history was repeating for them cruelly with Russia's renewed invasion. Once again, she and her children had to leave their home in a hurry. But already on the run, the next horrible news reached them. While trying to leave Bucha, which had been occupied in the meantime, the car of Julia's parents was shot at by Russian soldiers. Her mother died. Her father survived, seriously injured. And although Julia has experienced immeasurable suffering and her family's future prospects are still extremely uncertain, she has been tirelessly involved in humanitarian aid since her arrival in Aachen, and she advises people who want to flee Ukraine. Together with her sister Oksana, she founded the initiative Sokil in Ukraine, which evacuates old and disabled people from the front and has thus already helped many people to find a new home and to survive. Also with the help of the Association Ukrainians in Aachen, the Hryvniova family has integrated here, learned a new language, found an apartment and schooling for their children. However, her husband has returned to help on the ground. Like him, the entire family has not given up Ukraine. It is still their homeland to which they want to return. Many Ukrainians feel the same way as Julia Hryvniova and her family. Therefore, after providing immediate support from the beginning, it was our special task to offer the people, in addition to the said safe haven, perspectives beyond the war. This enables them to enjoy a life in freedom again, here with us or in their homeland. Together with countless organizations, initiatives, associations, and volunteers, we have created these perspectives and will continue to do so in future, side by side and in direct exchange with the Ukrainians, be it on a local level, as just described, on a national and international level, or on a municipal level within the framework of the solidarity-based city partnership. We are currently building such a partnership with Chernihiv, a city in the north of Ukraine which, in addition to its current population and infrastructure, has another parallel to Aachen. Albeit to the Aachen that the founding fathers of the Charlemagne Prize described in their proclamation of 1949, and they described it as follows. After 2 world wars in which the border situation of our city had a particularly detrimental effect, in which the honest efforts of several generations to overcome imaginary national antagonisms proved to be in vain, our city, which has sunk into ruins, is struggling for its right to live. Just as Aachen, back then, Chernihiv, is today to a large extent destroyed. Therefore, we enter into this partnership not only to express our unconditional solidarity in this way, but above all, to support Chernihiv and its inhabitants in their efforts to rebuild their city as a sustainable city and to make it their home again. Our concrete cooperation will start tomorrow with the representatives, and I'm so happy to have the Lord Mayor from Chernihiv amongst us. The fact that the possibility of returning home still exists, that families like Julia Genyovas can still dream of a future in freedom in their homeland, and that people, whether in Ukraine, throughout Europe, or here with us, still have any hope at all for an end to this conflict, would probably not be possible without the man whom we are honoring today, together with the Ukrainian people, with the Charlemagne Prize, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Zelenskyy shows courage, leadership, tactical sensitivity, and he demonstrates a new, clear and unambiguous political style. The citation reads, among other things, and further, he is a support and also a role model for his people. He stands against hopelessness and despair and for the confidence, the goal of a free, independent and sovereign Ukraine, which is part of the European family of nations. Zelenskyy gives strength to Ukraine, but also to the European Union to believe in this ideal. In this respect, he's also a role model for all Europeans to remember European ideals and values. All of you sitting here today document by your presence that Europe can be relied upon. As I've just described, we are assuming our responsibility by preparing together for the time after. Because as you, President Zelenskyy, hold your people together and give them strength and confidence in the greatest crisis, you show us with your personality and determination not only how we can stand together for Europe and freedom, but you also give us confidence that you will find a way together with us in the same way to give the Ukrainian people a peaceful and democratic future. We stand by your side, by the side of the Ukrainian people.
The opening words by the mayor of the city of Aachen, Sibylle Keupen there. And the next speaker is going to be the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who accompanied the Ukrainian president from Berlin to Aachen today.
Dear citizens of Ukraine, dear President Zelenskyy, dear Volodymyr, dear Lord Mayor Keupen, dear Chairman Dr. Linden, dear Jürgen, dear President of the Commission, dear Ursula, dear Prime Minister, dear Mateusz, ladies and gentlemen. President Tusk, those were the words, dear Mr. President, dear Volodymyr, that you said, quoted in one of the first video messages concerning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The President is here, we are all here. On the early in the morning of the 25th of February 2022, this is when you said this, together standing in the center of Kiev, and you added, all of us will defend our independence, and that will be how things remain. It's very rare in history that such brief words have had such an effect. It was immediately clear the Ukrainian people will not give in to Russian violence. The Ukrainian people will survive. And it's for this reason alone that we can be together here in Aachen today. Europe has a lot to thank the Ukrainian people for, and in particular this President, Mr. Zelenskyy. When the founders of the Charlemagne Prize in 1949 came up with the idea of the prize, many parts of Europe were lying in ruins. The terrible experience of 2 world wars, the violations of human rights, hunger, poverty and great sadness were all very present. Europe living in peace and freedom was a vision for the distant future. However, the founding fathers of the Charlemagne Prize saw their dream realized more and more each year. The list of laureates reads like a who's who of European integration. It ranges from Jean Monnet, Konrad Adenauer, Robert Schuman, Simon Weil, through to Václav Havel and Bronislaw Kilimnik. Men and women who have been driven by courage to push ahead with what many of us consider to be a matter of course, the peaceful development of Europe that makes the prosperity and peace of our people possible in the first place. But today, once again, we have a terrible war of aggression. Russia's terrible war of aggression, a war which for the people of Ukraine is painful, demands sacrifices like we could not imagine, a war that is against everything for which Europe today stands. And also a war which for Ukraine, for Europe, and its member states shows very clearly we are standing together, we belong together, and our history will carry on together. For the first time, the Charlemagne Prize is being awarded this year to a president and to his people. I think this is an exceptionally clever decision. because the Ukrainian people and you, my dear Volodymyr, together, starting on the 24th of February 2022, you have been achieving unbelievable things, tremendous bravery. You're defending your land with tremendous bravery against the aggressor Russian. Every day, people are defying the Russian aggression through their efforts. Russia's war of aggression has brought Ukrainian people and Europe together like never before. We stand together in solidarity at the side of Ukraine. Germany has taken up more than 1 million Ukrainian citizens. Poland has taken in over 1.5 million, and Czech Republic over 500,000. The number of Ukrainian-German twinning associations has doubled, and throughout Europe, the war has made one thing very clear: Ukraine is part of the European family. As France's president said, Italy's then Prime Minister Mario Draghi, Romania's President Klaus Iohannis, and myself, when we visited Kiev together, we emphasized this, and we stand by this statement again today. Russia and Ukraine are not one people, as President Putin claims in his imperialistic and colonialistic rhetoric. The Ukrainian nation has its own long history, its unbelievably diverse own culture, its own traditions, its own identity. Following the breakdown of the Soviet Union, Ukrainians have been fighting for the right to determine their own future themselves. And Ukraine has taken its decision, a decision in favor of Europe. Dear Volodymyr Zelenskyy, on the road to the European Union, Ukraine will have our full support. As Europeans, we know what energy is incorporated in the democratic will of the people. I think about Solidarność in Poland, the opening, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, brought about by courageous citizens of the GDR, and then the unification of Germany and Europe in the years thereafter. And of course, I also think about the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004 and the winter nights in the Maidan in 2013-2014. During this revolution of dignity, the blue-yellow flags of Ukraine and the blue and yellow flags of Europe became symbols of the freedom and self-determination of Ukraine. All of these popular movements demonstrate the strong will of people to determine their own futures themselves. Russia's war of aggression has not only strengthened Ukrainians' will as a political nation, it has also strengthened the will of the Ukrainian people to become a European nation. If Vladimir Putin believed that he would be able to bring Ukraine away from its path with his violence, and all his tanks, his rocket missiles have brought about nothing but the exact opposite. The European Union stands for peaceful coexistence by the people of Europe, for the political and economic cooperation between our member states, and for the beauty of cultural and linguistic diversity. The European Union stands for freedom and democracy, for the rule of law and protection of human rights, and in particular for the reconciliation between previous enemies. I'm very well aware of this as a German Chancellor, and that's what distinguishes us as Europeans. Therefore, every day we must pay attention to ensuring that the values of democracy, freedom and peace are maintained even within the EU. This striving for democracy, for rule of law, for freedom is also shared by the Ukrainian people. Dear Volodymyr, servants of the people, this is the claim with which you began your role as President of Ukraine, and you are precisely that today. When it comes to receiving the Charlemagne Prize on behalf of your people, the resistance and the desire for freedom inspire hope well beyond Ukraine. At the head of the Ukrainian people, you defend the values for which Europe stands. The Ukrainians can rely on our full support, humanitarian, economic support, weapons, and above all, in the long term. In 1986, the people of Luxembourg were the first people to receive the Charlemagne Prize. The text on the medal said, "The people of Luxembourg, a role model and perseverance on the way to a unified Europe." And this sentence, this phrase, is just as applicable today to the people of Ukraine. So today's conferring of the Charlemagne Prize does not represent an end point, but a beginning, the start of our new growing together in Europe, together with Ukraine, with the Western Balkan states, Moldova, Georgia. Given the change, the turn of the times, our message is clear. Europe is united and together. The Charlemagne Prize, as a prize for European citizens, means the deep respect of our free societies towards the bravery and courage of the Ukrainian people and their president.
Ukraina tut ak Ukraina chce Europa. Ukraine is here.
Ukraine is here, and Ukraine is Europe. Congratulations, and Slava Ukraina.
That was the speech by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to mark the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen being bestowed, awarded to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, as well as to the people of Ukraine. You're watching the live coverage of the ceremony here on DW. With me in the studio is Thomas Sparrow. This being a ceremony, obviously there's also music by Ukrainian composers. And we're listening now to Melody by Miroslav Skorik. This is DW's live coverage of the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen, which will be awarded to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the people of Ukraine. We already heard the speech by the German Prime Minister Olaf Scholz. Next is the European Commission President, Dr. Ursula von der Leyen.
Dear President Zelenskyy, dear Volodymyr, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Prime Minister Morawiecki, dear Mayor Sibylle Keupen, dear Dr. Linden, ladies and gentlemen. When you enter the city of Aachen and look at the wealth of ancient landmarks and monuments, you can almost feel with all of the senses the weight of European history, its violence and its beauty, its pain and its progress, its centuries-old divisions and its decades-young unity. This prize, as the founder Kurt Pfeiffer put it, embodies an obligation of the highest ethical value to make the next chapter of our common history better than the last one. That obligation is for a strong union of Europeans, quote, to defend the highest earthly goods, freedom, humanity, and peace, and safeguard the future of the children and children's children, unquote. The person and the people that we are recognizing today have lived up to that obligation that any one of us ever could. They are literally fighting for freedom, humanity, and peace. They are bleeding and they are laying down their lives to safeguard the future of their children and of ours. President Zelenskyy and the people of Ukraine know exactly what they're fighting for. And they have understood what Europe and our union is all about. My words cannot really do justice to this, far from it, but those of President Zelenskyy can. In his remarkable inauguration address in 2019, he told the people of Ukraine, and I quote, "We have chosen a path to Europe. But Europe is not somewhere out there. Europe is here, in our minds. And after it has appeared here once, it will be everywhere, all over Ukraine." Unquote. President Zelenskyy, Volodymyr, I am firmly convinced that those words will come true, and we will not stop working to make sure they do. Ladies and gentlemen, the story of pain comes with strength and courage. Ukraine has shown this every single day since that fateful morning when Russia sent tank columns and tens of thousands of soldiers across the border. When I met Volodymyr Zelenskyy in a shell-shocked Kiev a few weeks later, in the government neighborhood, I had just come back from Bucha. I had just seen the mass graves next to the church, the body bags lined up tightly together, the early cruel symbols of Putin's war. I will never forget the image of those innumerable candles everywhere, each of which represented a mother or a father, a son or a daughter, a brother or a sister, alive, senselessly extinguished. People's feelings were despair and anger. But they also had a firm belief, the belief that Ukraine was fighting back and turning the tide. When I spoke to President Zelenskyy in those early days, I called him many times, and I knew about his courage and his determination in those bleak early days. But on that day in Kiev, when I looked into his eyes for the first time, I was deeply touched by the steadfast determination he exuded. President Zelenskyy had and has the unshakable belief that those fighting for something will always be stronger than those fighting to impose their rule. And this is why, because of this courage and this determination, the victims and the values, I cannot think of a more befitting winner of this Charlemagne Prize than President Zelenskyy and the people of Ukraine. President Zelenskyy and the people of Ukraine are fighting for exactly the values and the obligation that this prize embodies. And in doing so, they're also fighting for our own freedom and our values, democracy and the rule of law, free speech, and the freedom to create your own destiny. This is what Ukraine is fighting for. And this is what President Putin is trying to extinguish. President Putin is destroying the work of peace that we have built together since the end of the Second World War and later after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Putin aims to destroy the Europe created by Charlemagne Prize laureates such as Guy Lafon and Václav Havel, François Mitterrand and Helmut Kohl, and many others. Putin tries to unravel the events of 1989 and the decades since, which saw the people of Europe tear down the Iron Curtain and Europe changed its face forever. As historian and Charlemagne Prize laureate Timothy Garton Ash put it so well. Every generation has its moment when it has to stand up to defend democracy and what it believes in. For us, this moment has come. And just as the courageous freedom fighters changed the face of our continent in Europe a little more than 30 years ago, today it is us, our actions, that will decide what our Europe will look like in future. The Ukrainian people have revealed to the world the strength of their society, their will to fight and to be free. This has amazed the world. Their ironclad certainty. Where they belong is fascinating. It's an inspiration for all of us. For a decade, the civil society, people in the Ukraine have been the architect of Ukraine's move towards the European Union. And never can we match the sacrifice and the bravery of the Ukrainian people, but we can stand firmly by their side. I'm not just talking about the tens of billions of euros of support to Ukraine, the sweeping sanctions against Russia, or the modern weapons and ammunition that we have pledged and delivered. I am also talking about accompanying Ukraine on its path towards our union and getting it ready for the future, even though the war is raging. I'm thinking also of the countless Europeans who've opened their homes and their hearts for Ukrainian refugees. 4 million people have found temporary shelter after leaving their homeland because of Putin's bombs. And I would like to thank and recognize the many volunteers. I would like to pay my respect to the cities and municipalities, the teachers and sports clubs who integrated Ukrainian children into their groups, and the countless enterprises that gave work to their parents. This is Europe at its best. Ladies and gentlemen, it is thanks to President Zelenskyy, thanks to the people of Ukraine, and thanks to all of us sticking together that Europe's face is changing once again. Ukraine incarnates everything the European idea is standing for: the courage to stand in for one's convictions, the fight for values and freedom, the commitment and the struggle for peace and unity. This is why I'm convinced that Ukraine will prevail. It will win peace and make its European destiny come true as part of our European family. Dear Alexandra Matvichuk, you, a few days ago in Vienna, said the following, and I quote, "People in Ukraine want peace more than anyone else, but peace does not come when the country that was attacked lays down its weapons. That's not peace, that's occupation. And occupation is just war in another form, just as bad as war." Unquote. You are so right. In our EU, we speak many different languages, 24 of them. But in all of them, victory translates as peace and justice. Just peace. As has always been the case with Europe, there will be skeptics saying that it is impossible, it's a fantasy. But what if this is in fact our duty, our task, to unite and make the impossible possible against all odds? Those words are again from President Zelenskyy. We speak of a victory, he said, when the guns fall silent and people are raising their voices. Unquote. He was back then talking about Ukraine. But these words also describe Europe and what it stands for, our Europe. So what if this was our idea? If it was our task of our Europeans to stand together and make the impossible possible. With today's prize, we are sending out a clear message. We stand by the side of President Zelenskyy. We stand by the side of the people in Ukraine. We stand by their side until we together achieve the impossible. Slava Ukraina. Long live Europe.
And that was the speech by the European Commission President, Dr. Ursula von der Leyen. You're watching a live coverage of the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen being awarded to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Thomas Sparrow is here with me.
And we're about to hear the speech by Mateusz Morawiecki, the Prime Minister of Poland, who's also attending the prize ceremony.
Dear President Zelenskyy, dear Volodymyr, dear Chancellor Scholz, dear President von der Leyen, dear President Metsola, dear Ukrainian friends, ladies and gentlemen, Charlemagne is the patron saint of European unity. Today, this unity is being put to the test. In these uncertain, dark times, we need people willing to defend the ideals of European and Western civilization. Volodymyr Zelenskyy is such a man. After February 24th, it became clear that two visions were at odds with each other. The first, Europe's dream of a community of sovereign nations in solidarity with one another concerning the common good. And the second, the Russian colonial and chauvinistic dream of power, resounding with imperialistic overtones and showing no regard for human life. The Ukrainian nation's response to the Russian invasion has provided a strong impetus for the reintegration of the European Union. Today, Ukraine is the outermost point of a united Europe. It is Ukraine which defends our freedom at its frontiers. Aachen is a city that symbolizes the unity of Europe. The tomb of Charlemagne is located in the cathedral here. The prize for Volodymyr Zelenskyy and admiration for the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian nation invite us also to reflect on the sources of our Europeanness. Who are we? Who do we wish to avoid becoming? Let us look for answers to these questions. If we want to describe the history of Europe in the last decades of the 20th century as briefly as possible, we can use the concepts of disintegration and reunification. The Polish movement of solidarity, and the fall of the Berlin Wall became a symbol not only of the fall of the totalitarian communist system, but also of the reunification of the whole of Europe. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the beginning of a journey of the nations of our region towards unity in a common Europe. Annexed territories were returned to their rightful owners. And the nations of Europe could finally be returned to Europe. What Europe means? Europe means cooperation above competition and unity in diversity. The collapse of the Russian Communist Empire allowed a release of energy and hope that had been suppressed for many decades of enslavement. All nations hope for freedom, sovereignty, and security. Europe should also resemble a local community. If a fire breaks out, neighbors come to each other's mutual aid. If someone gets sick, no one turns their back on them. The strength of European civilization is cooperation, its foundation is solidarity, and its heart and driving force are the desire for freedom. Europe is not just an old continent, a museum of beautiful ideas and values. Europe is a living community with a very rich cultural heritage that has radiated across the world for centuries. Enlightenment thinkers in the service of absolutist powers divided Europe into East and West. This division was meant to justify the exploitation of Central and Eastern Europe by Imperial Russia and give Westerners peace of conscience and a sense of moral superiority. We need to revise that division. There is no place for the image of an uncivilized East to which someone, preferably a strong man, a tyrant in the Kremlin, must bring order. Today, the uncivilized East is a barbaric Moscow that has become an inhumane land. Neither Ukraine nor any Eastern European country is a brother nation, inverted commas, of Russia. It is not brotherhood, but centuries of exploitation, colonialization, and imperialism. The ancestors of today's Poles, Ukrainians, and citizens of many other nations lived in a common state. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a political project that integrated various nations within one organism. Although it was an unfinished project, it was in fact one of the first attempts to build European unity, in a peaceful way. Let us recall the words of Robert Schuman. He wrote that a united Europe remains accessible to anyone who wishes to join it. Its raison d'être is solidarity and international cooperation. Now, let me say a few words on Volodymyr Zelenskyy, hero of Ukraine, role model for Europe. Not since Winston Churchill walked the streets of London during the Nazi bombing has the West had a leader who has so unquestionably risked his own life to defend his homeland. Volodymyr Zelenskyy did not listen to those who advised him to leave Kiev. We all remember his words, "The fight is here. I need ammunition, not a right." This call has not lost its relevance to this day. In the first hours of the invasion, it became clear that Volodymyr Zelenskyy was a great European leader. He became a true hero within 24 hours. Volodymyr Zelenskyy is the most outstanding leader on an international scale in the 21st century. His bravery has reminded European Union leaders of the importance of sovereignty and independence. It is a value for which nations are ready to shed blood in the 21st century. Were it not for the heroic attitude of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the European Union would now share a very long border with Russia. Putin would have gained the opportunity to destabilize not only our region, but all of Europe. President Zelenskyy is a role model for every political leader. We can learn from him what true leadership is all about. The war in Ukraine is an opportunity for the nations of Europe to engage in reflection. How can it return to the foundations of a united Europe? There would possibly be no war if the temptation of domination had not prevailed over the principle of equality. Hence, it is so important that we all show true solidarity, and despite differences, such solidarity is shown by the European Council and the European Commission. I want to thank Ursula and Roberta and all other leaders for your determination and perseverance towards Ukraine, and ask for more. Our European humanism too often went hand in hand with willingness to make a pact with evil. Compromise and appeasement in such a context only prolongs conflicts and the suffering that dictators inflict on innocent people. This was the case of Hitler prior to the Second World War. This was the case of Putin after Georgia and Donbass and Crimea 2014. The attitude of the Ukrainian people, the solidarity of Poles with their neighbors, and finally the decisive response of the European Union to the call of defending Ukraine have proven that the greatness of Europe is still alive and well. It is the ability to reach consensus, to get rid of the temptation of domination by the strong over the weak, that distinguishes the free nations of Europe from Russia's empire of evil. In Europe, there is no longer masters and subjects, no longer a center and its periphery. There is also no room for hegemony. Ukraine longs for such a Europe, a community of sovereign nations. President Zelenskyy reminds us that every nation's voice should be listened to with equal attention. Russia is anti-Europe, the antithesis of the Commonwealth. Its barbaric attack on Ukraine reminded us that political thinking does not invalidate moral categories. The war is a manifestation of the eternal conflict between good and evil. Good has the face of Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the defenders of Ukraine. Europe upholds the dignity of the human person, freedom of speech, and the separation of religious and temporal powers. In Russia, these values have been trampled. In Russia, the citizen is a mere pawn, speaking the truth as a crime pursued by the censors, and the church is an organ of the state. Europe must resist Russia, because Russia today is the negation of Europe. In Russia, the order of values has been overturned completely. Lying is called truth. Ukrainians are called Nazis. Enslavement is called liberation. And an unwarranted invasion is called a special operation. Russia's legacy is only common misery, common enslavement, and common suffering. Finally, we must not lose sight of the vision of a Europe united but rich in diversity, a Europe in which all countries, regardless of their size and economic potential, have equal rights. Finally, of a Europe bound together by solidarity. Dear Volodymyr, when we came to the besieged Kiev 2.5 weeks of the war, I assured you we would not abandon you. It was your personal courage and fortitude which was key to defending Ukraine, and therefore today's ceremony is one of the symbolic examples of Ukraine's integration into the European family. Europe will only become fully united when Ukraine joins us as full-fledged members of the European Union. I know it is your dream, and it is our desire too. As long as Ukraine is divided, Europe is divided. As long as Ukrainians give their lives for our freedom, the heart of Europe bleeds. We must also not forget the thousands of Ukrainian children kidnapped by Russia. As we express the hope that Ukraine will soon be free, we speak also for them. Today, once again, we as a European community stand before a test. We must learn from the harsh lessons of history, now, before it is too late. Let's give today's winner something more than a prize. Let's give Volodymyr and the Ukrainian nation our full support. Only in this way will we truly strengthen peace and security in Europe. Volodymyr Zelenskyy is the man who reminded us that the president is more than an office. It is to be with his people to death and life. In the center of Berlin, there was a sign, "Das ist nicht unser Krieg." This is not our war. One word of that sign was changed by someone, and it now says, "Das ist auch unser Krieg." This is also our war. The anonymous graffiti expressed what too many people are still afraid to admit. Yes, this war concerns us all. This war will decide what kind of Europe our children will live in. Will it be a Europe that has shattered the legacy of freedom, or the Europe that restored order to the world? This is perhaps the most important test of our lives. And we are running out of time. Volodymyr Zelenskyy and his nation need our action here and now. Let us stand for freedom. Let us stand for Ukraine. Let us stand for Europe. Thank you.
Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, and you are watching a live coverage of the award ceremony where the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen for European Unity is awarded to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and to the people of Ukraine.
And now we're actually going to see the moment
where he receives that prize.
Waiting for when he receives the prize that we've been talking for the last couple of hours. So this should be sort of the important moment.
Am 14. Mai 2023 wurde im Krönungssaal des Aachener Rathauses, der ehemaligen Kaiserpfalz, der internationale Karlspreis zu Aachen
The gentleman who is speaking in German, obviously, because Aachen, a city in Western Germany, is the chair of the directorate of the Charlemagne Committee, who will hand over the document to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, in which a lot of what we've heard in the speeches before is being reiterated, that the Ukrainian president and the people of Ukraine defend the values of Europe.
And after handing that diploma, we will see Sibylle Keupen, the mayor of the city of Aachen, hand the medal. In fact, we can see already that the medal has been handed to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy,
who will very shortly give his acceptance speech, of course. Everybody's waiting for Zelenskyy to also address the hall there, the coronation hall in the city hall of Aachen. But before that, which is custom, we will hear an anthem, the anthem of Charlemagne of the city of Aachen from the 12th century. The award is not quite as old, but the city, of course, is, which is also highly symbolic.
The first time this prize was awarded was 1950. And a long list of people that are now joined by Volodymyr Zelenskyy have received this award in the past, including Pope Francis, former German chancellors Angela Merkel, Konrad Adenauer, Helmut Kohl, as well as other European leaders such as Václav Havel and Jean Monnet. And these are only a few of the many people that have received this prize since it was first awarded in 1950.
So we're watching the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy there just received the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen for European Unity, and here's his reception speech.
Thank you so much. Great honor to be here. Madam Mayor, Mr. Linden, dear Olaf, dear Ursula, Mateusz, Roberta, dear colleagues, thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words about Ukraine. First of all, about Ukraine and our heroes and our soldiers and our children. Thank you very much. My appreciation. They are real heroes. Thank you so much. Thank you for Europe, which is now finally able to fulfill the dream that was laid at the basis of European unity. It is an honor for me to represent the Ukrainian people today, here, and each day. Millions of people who are fighting, working for our values and for our freedom and for our free Europe. All Ukrainians, each of our heroes deserve to stand here and to receive this award. But since the millions of people just will not fit in this hall, let our language, which represents all our people, be spoken here today. The Ukrainian language has never been spoken in these walls by the awardee. And now, when Ukraine is returning to its native European home, I believe that the Ukrainian language will be spoken here on many occasions from now, while recognizing special contribution to the European unity. Ukrainians will always make Europe stronger. You have to prepare. I will continue in Ukrainian. Technically. Thanks so much. Or maybe you began to learn. That's great news. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Everyone in this room today, everyone who stands with us in defense of freedom and Europe, we are all more than leaders and politicians, public figures and diplomats. We're all the founders of peace. Exactly, founders of peace. This is our primary duty to our countries, to our Europe, and to our history. It is peace. It is peace that we will bequeath to our children and grandchildren as a legacy of today. We do not have and do not want any other alternative, but to leave peace as a legacy, we must reach the day when we can say that we're ending this war with our joint victory. Dear Europeans, history is built on victories, although it also remembers defeats. There have been illusions that there are other bricks for history than victories, but such illusions have resulted in the disappearance, or at best, many years of silence in the history of those who profess them. Illusions turn into deaths. The peace of our parents' generation is the peace left to them by those who defeated the penultimate great aggression in Europe. And the peace of our children's generation is the peace that we are gaining now in the battles right now against the latest aggression in Europe. The battles are taking place and ongoing at a distance of more than 2,000 kilometers from Aachen, on the land of Ukraine, in our skies and the Black Sea, and in European destiny. This battlefield is the fate of Europe. Today's Russia has waged aggression not only against us as a free state, not only against a united Europe as a global symbol of peace and prosperity, but also against the past. By taking over kilometers of Ukrainian territory, Russia was trying to overcome years of European history, the history of ours jointly of the 73 years that the Charlemagne Prize has been awarded here. We're faced with an aggressor who's willing to commit any cruelty and meanness.
But we don't afraid, because we are together. Thank you very much.
We're faced with an aggressor who's willing to commit any cruelty and meanness, and to claim that history allegedly does not change, that it will be the same as it was before, and it will be the same again, as if whoever has the power has the territory, as if whoever is capable of greater meanness has more rights to Europe, as if civility is worthless. This is what Russia is manifesting with this genocidal aggression. We are faced with an aggressor for whom our common European aspiration for peace and rules means nothing. And he wants Europe to have something that no free nation, no honest leader, no one in this room will accept ever. You and I, we all are united in the belief that Europe and all other parts of the world should not be a place where the ambitions of tyrants destroy the lives of peoples. We must become winners, so that our view and we must become winners, so that our view of life remains in Europe. Dear Europe, Ukraine offers you victory that will be peace and will save you. Ukraine offers a victory not just in this one war, but over aggressions, over annexations, over burning down these cities, deportations, the catastrophe of genocide, anywhere else on earth. We're offering and bringing closer a common victory over the one who has brought all this old evil from the pages of the past in order to destroy our future, which we all, the whole of Europe, dream of for our children. Russia has chosen the path of evil, of its own free will. Our will is enough to cut off this path and the path of any similar aggressors who might someday try to follow Russia and repeat what Russia is doing. We will fulfill this task, all of us together. Dear Olaf, I'm personally addressing you, and through you, to the entire country, this potential nation of yours, Germany, Ukraine, and the whole of Europe. We respect your choice to be for Europe, to be with Europe. When you saw the Zeitenwende, you acted as a defender of Europe should. Europe will always be grateful to you and to this German government. Grateful for your efficiency in helping Ukraine, for your and your colleagues' efficiency in defending your country, and for the strength that you and all of Germany give to Europe. Brilliant German irises have already saved thousands of lives of our people from Russian missile terror. Powerful German martyrs are helping to protect the lives of our soldiers as they put pressure on the Russian occupiers. Sturdy German leopards provide us with the protection we need. And it is very important that Germany helps not only militarily, but also with its leadership in the economy, humanitarian sphere and diplomacy. Last year, Ukraine presented its 10 points of our formula for peace, and I believe that Germany will be one of the leaders in its implementation in the same way. This Russian aggression continues on our land. It is our people who are dying every day in the confrontation with this evil, which, by striking Ukraine, strikes at the very idea of a peaceful Europe, at the very idea of a rules-based international order based on rules. We see the evil, we see it, and we see the evil of aggression most very close up. And so we'll see the best way to defeat this evil, how to prevent its replication in other parts of the world or at other times. And we invite the world to join our just and fair principles of peace. Everyone who joins our formula of peace actually makes it their own. And I'm convinced that the Ukrainian formula of peace can become the German formula for peace, can become the European formula for peace, can become the world formula for peace. The only one who does not accept it is the aggressor. And that's why he does not accept that he is the aggressor. But the most important thing is that he's only one alone, and we're not afraid of him. And he does not accept it because he's not interested in peace. There were hundreds of rounds of negotiations between 2014 and 2022 in various formats with Russia after it occupied our Crimean Peninsula and after it fueled a hybrid war against Ukraine in Donbass. All these negotiations took place, and you, Olaf, Mr. Chancellor, and you remember that, and our ally, Mr. President of France, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, and all the conscientious leaders of the world spend hours and hours talking to Putin, trying to avert a catastrophe, this modern catastrophe. But Putin chose a disaster. Putin chose disaster. He alone. And now, everyone understands what we understand. Putin is the catastrophe. That's the response. Putin is aggression. And he does not want anything else for himself and his people, anything else. But his formula has become death. What can we talk to him about now? How can you talk about it? In its long history, humanity has never known anyone who could negotiate with death. The one who brought death, the one who embarked on the path of genocide, the one who wants to destroy us, wants to destroy Europe, the Europe we value, must ask for mercy. And then our response to him will be the tribunal. Our common determination will lead to the fact that we will see also that Russia would show interest in our efforts for peace. This will happen, and that's when there is no source of death there. We're capable of winning, and we're bringing the victory closer. And this has been proven more than once by the tears of joy of children and adults, women and men, young and old, whom of our soldiers have liberated from Russian occupation. Everywhere where our blue and yellow flag returns to the liberated land, Europe returns, our common Europe. The values come back. The values return that you, just like us, defended on your squares and enshrined in your constitutions. This is a fact that freedom for our people, whom Russia tried to enslave, is ensured by the bravery of our soldiers and the weapons, including yours, all of those who help us defend ourselves. That is why now only weapons can stop death, and that's a fact. Therefore, we have to be firm and steadfast in support and help Ukrainian defenders. Very often, including here in Aachen, during the award ceremony of this prize, this honorable prize, it has been said that Europe should become one of the world's superpowers. Unlike other similar powers, Europe has this potential only when it is not something else but European unity that becomes a superpower. We see it now, the superpower of European unity. We see it thanks to Ukraine and thanks to each and every one of you. Thank you. We thank you. Your solidarity and leadership, dear colleagues, in particular, your solidarity and leadership, Ursula, with which the European Union has responded to our courage, have reflected the basic principles that Robert Schuman, Konrad Adenauer and Jean Monnet wanted for Europe. They would be proud of each and every one of you who is defending Europe together with Ukraine. Ukrainian courage and your solidarity have given Europe a unity it has never seen before. The time has come to consolidate the strength of our unity with the decision to join the European Union for Ukraine. And you know that Europe will not be complete without Ukraine in the European Union. And I thank you, Olaf. I thank every leader of Europe who supports the completion of the European project. There's no rational reason why our soldiers who have fought so heroically and successfully for our common freedom, for our common values, are not yet in the same organization as all other NATO soldiers. Judging by the results of our actions, Ukraine is already in the alliance, but the de jure decision has not yet been made. It is time to finally make this decision, and we need to define an algorithm for Ukraine's membership in NATO that motivates our soldiers. In addition to strengthening the entire Euro-Atlantic with the courage of the Ukrainians, our joining the alliance will have another historic result. NATO flags next to Ukraine's on our eastern border will be the lock, powerful lock that will keep Russian imperialism in the past forever. In the past, that cannot be returned, because without control over Ukraine, Russian imperialism is going to die. And one more prerequisite for our common victory, which Ukraine offers and proposes, the longest peace and the most reliable security in Europe has been ensured by building ties between the peoples of Europe instead of barriers. And when we see now that instead of strengthening our ties, any fresh barriers that are so reminiscent of old mistakes, whether they are barriers in politics or barriers in trade, then we see a threat not only to one European nation, but to the whole of Europe. Mateusz, I'm very grateful for the great support from Poland to Ukraine and for Ukraine. Thank you. And it's very important for us to keep this unity. Any spark of misunderstanding between anyone in Europe should not give rise to conflict. And this is in the fundamental interests of our nations. Europe gains in strength and prosperity every time there is a barrier subtracted on the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, today I've spoken only about what is needed for our common victory, and therefore only about what is needed for a sustainable peace for all of us. I dream of Europe becoming a winner. I know that Ukrainians can win. I call on all of you to become winners together with Ukrainians, together with us. This time has come. And it is now that it is decided how this war will end and whether this is indeed the last aggression in Europe. Everything depends on our unity. And only on this, on our speed, on our determination to win. So my appeal to you today is to be worthy of Charlemagne's character. Win.
Sorry, a little bit more.
Establish peace, which will be the fruit of our common victory, and which we will leave to our children and grandchildren as the main heritage of Europe, our common heritage. And if anyone still has doubts about whether to support the Ukrainian people, please, here in Aachen or in any other city of our beautiful, free Europe, go outside. Please, go outside, look around you, and feel the main thing we want, the thing that gives us all peace and respect in Europe. Feel the freedom. It's just there. It's just there. And we are fighting for it. And we will be victorious. Glory to all our soldiers who are fighting for the sake of Ukraine at combat posts and in combat missions. Glory to all those who train Ukrainian soldiers. Glory to everyone who helps, who works, who fights. Ukraine will win. Europe will win. Peace will prevail. Glory to Ukraine.
And you're watching the live coverage here on DW of a ceremony at the Coronation Hall, the City Hall of the city of Aachen, where the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy just received the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen 2023 for European unity. President Zelenskyy, they're receiving the prize also on behalf of the people of Ukraine. And here with me in the studio is DW political correspondent Thomas Sparrow. Thomas, you and I, we've been following this ceremony now for the last almost 2 hours. We've heard a lot of very interesting and very strong speeches by the German Chancellor, the European Commission President, by the Prime Minister of Poland, and now also by Volodymyr Zelenskyy, praising European unity, but also pointing out that there is an aggressor, some even going as far as calling him evil, talking about Russia and Vladimir Putin, of course. What stood out for you there?
Well, we're still watching that standing ovation after Volodymyr Zelenskyy's speech, and we are slowly coming to the end of this ceremony in Aachen. There are only a few points left in the schedule, including a poem that is going to be read out loud, some music at the end as well, and it's expected that Volodymyr Zelenskyy will write something in the book of important guests of the city of Aachen, and at the end...
Which he seems to be doing right now, right headed towards the table there.
Correct, that's what we're seeing. And at the end, it's also expected that we'll hear the hymn of the...
European anthem, yeah.
Correct, the European anthem. And indeed, it's been, I think, an important moment, a symbolic moment for European Union and European solidarity. In fact, the Polish Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, said that it's a symbolic example of Ukraine's integration into the European family. I think with that sentence, he really summarizes what all this is about, this symbolic example of Ukraine's integration into the European family.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of was echoed by all the speeches about Ukraine's important, pivotal role in defending European values and making this European unity possible, this European family.
Absolutely, and that's the reason why he and the Ukrainian people were actually awarded this Charlemagne Prize, because this is not only seen as something that affects Ukraine, it's seen as a war that is also a challenge to European values when it comes to democracy, to respect of human rights, to borders that cannot be simply redrawn by another country using force, by territorial integrity, another important value. All those elements are seen as very important here in Europe, and that's why the fight that Ukraine is carrying out is also seen as a fight that's important for Europe.
And we're now hearing a poem, which translated...
Випаленими очима, залізом в ключиці, жити далі потрібна вагома причина. І вона говорить йому, дивлячись в застиглі очниці: не хвилюйся, тепер я буду твоїми очима.
Now, I will be your eyes. Will burn out eyes and an eye in your club. You need a good reason to live on. And she tells him, looking into his frozen eyes, don't worry, I'll be your eyes now. I will always be able to give you some advice. I will tell you what the weather is like. I love you too much to tell you a lie. Your English to live is just a shame. And he feels that he has too much metal in his body. And he knows how dark it will feel for the rest of his life. And he hears the voices of those coming out of the station. And he finds a tear by touching a dead eyelid. And he says, then tell me what I don't see. What is the sky above us made of now? Tell me, how will you convince my blind soul? Tell me how you will negotiate with my dreams. You don't see, she says, how we're lacking in luck, how stubbornly the morning trams tread the path. And you don't see how old the people are you used to see, and how they forget about those who are gone. I can, she says, be as light as a breath, to be like a beast that will not hurt anyone. The only thing I can't do is to make you forget about your dead, so that you don't dream about those who will never come. And even if this winter lasts for years, even if the world hurts with every breath, be its breath and its hands, be his voice, be his laughter, you must now see for those who cannot see. You must now love for those who do not love. This winter, even the trees stand as if they're tired too, like people. Be an extension of his curled fingers. Be the end of his long sentences. The winter sky above you in the morning is made up of proofs and denials. Starý Žadan.
Which will be followed by a piece of music, Prayer for the Ukraine now. And the European anthem, they're concluding a ceremony to show the respect and to praise and support the people of Ukraine by bestowing the International Charlemagne Prize of Aachen for European unity to their president, to Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
This marks the end of, I would say, a very moving ceremony as well. We heard from different European leaders, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, who's actually spent the whole day with Volodymyr Zelenskyy. We also heard from Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, all strengthening the idea of a common Europe, a common heritage, also common values, also in a way a common battle against what they all described with different words as the aggressor, in this case being Russia. This is all about European unity, this prize that's awarded in the city of Aachen in Western Germany. It's an award to recognize someone that has, or an institution that has played a relevant role when it comes to European unity. And we clearly heard that from those that were speaking today about that idea of European unity and the fact that Ukraine's battle, Ukraine's struggle is not only something that's important to Ukraine, but that it's also very important to Europe as well. That idea of values that are being fought together.
Yeah, some quite strong speeches there as well. And of course, it's been a long day for President Zelenskyy, and the day doesn't end just yet. He's headed to France now, as we hear.
We're actually receiving information from French media outlets that he's probably heading to France after being now in Aachen. It's not that far away from the city of Aachen to Paris. But I imagine that that's part of his idea of visiting several European capitals, several European countries close together. So he went to Italy before coming to Germany, and if those reports are to be believed, then he will be continuing his trip to France.
All right. Well, Thomas Barrow, first of all, thank you so much
My pleasure.
for sharing the studio space with me for this live coverage of this ceremony, because at this point we'll conclude our coverage. Obviously, you've been watching DW, following the events all day, basically, the Ukrainian president visiting Berlin and then Aachen, where he received the prestigious Charlemagne Prize. We will continue with other news shortly with the latest results from the Turkey election, the Thai election. So there's a lot going on. So do stay tuned. And again, thank you so much, Thomas Barrow.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
He is shaking up gaming.
Yo guys, I don't just play video games, I win.
Respawn into the life of Brian the Beast Lianga. The Kenyan esports legend is proving controllers can change lives.
Esports can make and help a lot of young Africans express themselves.
Every Max.